Welcome to the Paranormal Pendle podcast, coming to you from the heart of Pendle Witch Country in the northwest of England. My name is Craig Bryant, author, investigator and collector of stories. Join me as we take a journey into the paranormal, UFO sightings, cryptozoology and big cats. This is the Paranormal Pendle podcast. Hello and welcome to episode 11 of Paranormal Pendle, broadcasting to the Paranormal UK Radio Network at paukradio.com. Now, I'm delighted that my guest on this episode is paranormal investigator and author John Tantalon from the North Edinburgh Nightmares. So, John, thank you very much for coming on the episode with me today. Real pleasure to speak to you. Could you start by just telling us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, certainly. Well, my name is John Tantalon. I have been had an interest in sort of ghost stories and the paranormal for many, many years, being based in Edinburgh, the whole time. So, I mean, I got some stories from a young age from my grandfather, who was in the Merchant Navy and a trawlerman. So he was a man with wide selection of stories, both supernatural and, nautical, and he'd relay them from a young age. For the area I lived in, it's not famous for its ghost stories. Many of the famous ones being up the town in the old town of Edinburgh, but I've known many from around these parts for many years. So when I decided, possibly 4 years ago, to write the book North Edinburgh Nightmares, I thought I'm going to try and bring some of these lesser known tales to the table and let people hear them for themselves, and that's where it all kind of began, Craig.
Well, first of all, apologies for not pronouncing your surname right. No, that's fascinating. The one thing that I did pick up when you sent me the email was that actually we seem to have a similar background. My grandfather used to tell me ghost stories. We used to be sat in front of what was like a sort of range cooker, the old cast iron range cooker. And we used to sit there and he used to tell me ghost stories. So we sort of have had a similar start, really. I'm really interested, actually, in any stories that he might have told you with a sort of nautical nature. Is there any stories that he was particularly fond of telling you about that side of his life?
There's one very famous one that has been I've covered it quite a few times. Would you like me to tell you?
I'd love it. Yeah, please. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it went something like this. Now, my granddad, as I said, he was in the Merchant Navy. And afterwards, after World War II, he worked on the trawler ships. Where I live is in Granton. It's in the Forth Estuary. It's right across from a harbour, and that's where he sailed from. He sailed many, many trips on vessels as far away as the Faroe Islands, to the Shetlands, Orkney. And basically what he would say is the fish in those waters were monsters of the deep. It was worth a crew going that far out to get them. So they'd done many trips there. And one of their trips from Granton Harbour, they sailed out to the Faroe Islands. And one of the crew members, who was at the back of the vessel named the Alma, was knocked into the sea with a huge wave, swept him overboard. Now, the man whose name was Geordie Walker was a seasoned trawlerman. He shouldn't have went over. So the crew rushed to the back of the boat, the Alma, to try and retrieve him. And as they did, Geordie Walker went right beneath the boat and flew back onto the deck of the Alma, crash, saved by the wave. So they brought him to and said, what happened? Why on earth did you go overboard? You're a seasoned trawlerman. And the man was very confused. He says, it wasn't the wave. He says, I can deal with him. That was the new guy on the boat that either went to push me or grab me. He went to, come. I said, I've never seen him. He's the new guy on the boat. Why is there 13? They said, you're havering, man. There's no 13th sailor. There's just the 12 of us. And he says, I can remember him as clear as day. Right down his hand when he tried to grab me, he had a tattoo on his hand. It was a thistle. And above the thistle was the word Slangivar. Good luck. He says, I remember it clear as day. Where is he? And they were all puzzled. He said, there's no new man with this tattoo. So the rest of them got back to business. My granddad, he was slightly bewildered by this, went back to his post. So the boat, the Alma, docked back at Granton the next day. Good catch. They unloaded the fish off the boat, got them onto the middle pier and went to a local pub, the Granton Tap. So when they were inside the confines of the Granton Tap, my granddad took Geordie Walker aside to the lounge and spoke to him. He told him a story. He said that last year they were on a trip to the Shetlands, the Orkneys or something. And they were, same scenario, a big good catch. They were loading on the middle pier, taking the fish off. They'd finished and they were climbing up the steep metal railing off the side of the boat. And there was a man on board the Alma by the name of Mr. Ross. Mr. Ross unfortunately lost his footing on the metal rail and went crashing onto the deck of the Alma, head first. So my granddad rushed over to try and save him, holding the man's shattered head as he lay on the deck, passing in and out of consciousness. Soon enough, help arrived and they ran over to try and help Mr. Ross, but sadly it was too late. They were holding his hand, feeling for a pulse, and it was the same hand with the word Slangy-Var tattooed up on it.
Wow. That's quite chilling, really, isn't it? I mean, I would imagine that he had some real stories to tell. I mean, just being a trawler man. Yeah, go on.
Always remembered about the conclusion about the man with a tattoo being Mr. Ross. They were all characters from the area.
They were tough men, weren't they? I mean, they did a tough job, and they were tough men. So they didn't suffer fools gladly. So when something strange like that happened, it probably affected them more than you would realise. You mentioned in your email that you sent me with your sort of brief bio about your book. So do you want to tell us a bit about your book, and then any stories in there that you think would be interesting to tell?
Yes, certainly. Now, the book, as I said, I started it maybe 3 years ago, and it was released last October with the powers of lockdown, having more time to work on it, and eventually came out. So the book contained 13 fictional tales, all based on events from the area where I live. So there was elements of folklore in there with sort of fantastical scenarios. The Slangy-Var story was one of them, that was in there. There was also other stories of the area, and one famous one that is literally round the corner from where I live, at the back of my house, is called a passageway called the Wardie Steps. Now, the Wardie Steps is a steep set of maybe 100 steps. It is a shortcut from the harbour, which leads up to the main road. And along the way, they have what's known as the Fishwives Puzzle. It is a set of iron bars to prevent people from stealing trails of fish. You could get them up the steps, but you got there, you could not get them through, hence the title of the Fishwives Puzzle. Now, over the years, there's been numerous spooky tales about these steps. Everything from muggers, to people waiting and to catch, unaware sailors coming up and robbing them of their pay. But there's also a couple of supernatural ones up there. The first happened in the late 60s with a chap who was, worked for the Devlin trawler company, coming up from the pub late at night and claimed to have seen a man at the top of the steps, along with the sound of the Fishwives Puzzle ringing violently. And the man, when he got closer, he claimed did not have a face. He was discovered by a policeman at midnight, presumed him steaming drunk. And when he got him round, he said the same thing. It was the guy at the top caused me to collapse, no face. 3 other people leading up to 1975, 1981 have had similar escapades with a strange character on the Wardie Steps. So that was one of the good stories, and very close, that features in the book. There are many others. There's, some sort of ones of kind of an incident in a castle in the Black Hall area, a famous Edinburgh castle. There are many in the area, smaller castles, and this one was called Craig Crook Castle. It's famously haunted by a gentleman called Lord Francis Jeffrey. And I had the pleasure to attend Craig Crook Castle on a few occasions. And it was the one time, and I can safely say I've encountered something truly supernatural that I couldn't explain. So there are 13 stories, similar tales in the book, and it's available since last October.
So where can people buy it then?
Amazon is the best. I mean, it was published through Amazon, so you can probably buy it in other places, but in Edinburgh, you can get it in, kind of the touristy shops uptown. But
Yeah.
Amazon's your base week, so I think they print it on demand.
Yeah. So can we talk about Edinburgh then as a city? Because obviously Edinburgh is steeped in history, a lot of it quite violent and bloody over the years, as we well know. I would imagine that there are any number of ghost stories or haunted places in the old city of Edinburgh. I wonder if you could possibly tell us some of those, because I don't actually know an awful lot about Edinburgh as a city, and I certainly don't know an awful lot about the paranormal side of the city. But I would imagine there is quite a lot to talk about.
Yes, I mean it's certainly is a city steeped in history. I'm fortunate enough to work dead in the city centre of Edinburgh, next to some very, very old parts of town. So I'm blessed there every day. I'm just round the corner from, the site of a haunted prison. Not far from the famous Mary King's Close and numerous famous cemeteries. And when I've done the videos and the stuff on my website, although I began around about the area where I live, I've ventured off and done stuff all around Edinburgh now. I've done stuff from the boroughs outside the seaside of Edinburgh, Portobello, the Queen's Ferry. Well, they are ghost stories too. But I've also covered a lot from the city centre and the old town. Just last month, we focused on an episode of our channel, and it was all about the cemeteries of Edinburgh. We were lucky enough to cover some of the great stories there. One of the famous ones being the Greyfriars Kirk. We got in tow with the wonderful City of the Dead tours, who do the tours around the Greyfriars Kirk, the Ghost Walks, and the famous Covenanters Prison. They are the only people with the keys to the much talked about Mackenzie poltergeist. So I spent a good few weeks in the grounds filming with the City of the Dead folk, and it was truly chilling. I went at night, I was in during the day, and heard all about the story of George Mackenzie, known as the Bloody Judge, who persecuted and terminated the Covenanters, a religious movement. Put them in the extent of a concentration camp in the grounds of the cemetery, left them to die. They say that in the late 90s, the tomb was disturbed by somebody entering it and falling in the tomb. And since then, the activity has become phenomenal, resulting in people on the tours scratched, bitten, all kinds of horrible wounds in the vicinity of the Covenanters prison. In 2000, they had an exorcist visit the place. I never knew this one. I called Colin Grant, an old man. And he came in, he says, whatever is in here, whatever evil spirit, I will make it safe today. He was accompanied by the Edinburgh Evening News, the paper. And when Colin Grant left, he was in quite a state. He was sweating, he was out of breath, and saying, there is not one poltergeist in this place. There is a sea of torment. The place is full of tragic souls. And a week later, this chap was doing a reading in his shop, and he died there and then after it was almost like he knew it was coming. He said to the lady he was doing the reading for, I've no more good news for you today, only bad. Soon after, died. So that was an incredible story,
Yeah.
The famous Greyfriars with Greyfriars Bobby.
Yeah.
There are many others of the Body Snatchers, Burke and Hare, Deacon Brodie, all old city centre characters that were all up to no good.
Yeah.
Many other sort of smaller, kind of ghost stories too. But the very, very historic place.
Burke and Hare's quite a famous one, isn't it? And of course, there's been numerous films and books and all sorts of stuff written about it. And in fact, my wife, who's a teacher, used to work in a school where the head had traced he was called Burke, and he'd actually traced his family tree, and it turned out he was descended from the Mr. Burke. I mean, is there any sort of paranormal stories surrounding those two? Because obviously, they're quite famous characters, aren't they?
There are connections. Now, one of the places we visited, I was doing the episode, was a place called the Niddry Street Vaults. Now, Niddry Street Vaults was a series of catacombs discovered sometime in the late 80s, 90s, I believe. And it was one time a place where the poor of Edinburgh would lodge. They would live in there, very dark conditions, up to 30 people to a room. And some of the residents that lived there were Birkenhead before they got their property in the West Port in Tanner's Close. But they lived in there, and that is a very haunted part of Edinburgh. Last year, I did an evening with a paranormal group from Cheshire. They came up, Spirit Vision Paranormal Research, and we did a night in the top of the vaults in a pub called Whistle Binkies, and there was so much went on there. I'd never done anything like that before, and apart from holding an interest in it, but never been in with all the equipment all night, and it was terrifying. In a word, terrifying.
So what sort of things happened then?
Okay, well, it commenced with the group setting up on a Sunday night about a year ago, September. Some parts of the pub, which were part of the vaults, are little booths down at the back of it, and they're the parts that have got the most activity. So they set up in there, and they had cameras all over the place, and including, it was like a glass with a little cat's ball on it. And Sarah from Paranormal Activity, Spirit Vision Research, was asking it questions, and it was getting slight activity with this ball activating, the light flashing. And they said maybe it is the spirit of a woman, she doesn't want to talk to men. So they got manageress and one of the staff down to sit in the booth with them, the three of them, and the ball went crazy. They were asking it questions, and it was answering very fast. It was getting quite active, until they used the word demon and asked it, and it started to get a lot worse. And they presumed that it was not, in fact, the spirit of a woman they spoke to, the spirit of a man, possibly an evil man that was quite happy to have three women sitting around them talking. There was other instances that there was things activating through the night when we were asking questions. There was one point about 2 a.m. when we went up the stairs, which go to the top of North Bridge, a very famous part of Edinburgh. And they were asking questions. And there was the equivalent of something like a car alarm on the steps that if anything would go remotely near it, it would activate. And it was activating with every question, almost as if something was getting closer with each of the questions. That was, quite creepy. I left about, I can't remember what time, but they continued for a few hours after. And they got some great results. Oh, that was the other thing. They also recorded a voice. They picked up a voice saying something. And it's on their channel. I can't remember what the word was. But it was quite a night.
So have you done any other investigations yourself then, or with any other groups?
Yes, well, with the Spirit Vision group, I've done several now. We've been to many other locations. Up to then, the only paranormal experience I'd really had was on the visit to Craigcrook Castle. And that was, terrifying enough. The rest of the time, I've really collected more other people's stories, people telling their events of experiences. But I could clearly say I'd never, seen or heard anything until 2014. And then, it was worth its weight in gold what uncovered in Craigcrook Castle that one night. But I've since done quite a few visits with the Spirit Vision group. We went to a famous location outskirts of Edinburgh called Yester Castle in Haddington. Now this is in the middle of the woods. You have to walk for quite a distance to find these ruins, and it was famously built by Hugo de Gifford, supposedly a wizard and occultist, and aided by an army of goblins. This place is something to see. Even in the daytime, it's terrifying. So we did, some investigation there. We did one last summer. We went to, last autumn, to a cemetery nearby to me called Warriston Cemetery. Now in the cemetery is the tomb of a lady called Mary Ann Robertson. And over the years, since the late 70s, there's been reports and sightings of a woman in white seen walking the graveyard. So we went out to try and contact her. So on Saturday night, they got their equipment, sensory equipment, I can't remember the proper titles, around the site of the tomb. And they got some feedback there. They solid base, the recorded movement on it. There's no train lines, anything nearby that could have possibly caused that. They also had sounds and kind of temperature change. It was quite a mild September evening, and the temperature really dropped when they were asking specific questions about the desecration of the tomb in the late 70s, where somebody stole the head of the Mary Ann Robertson. When they asked that question, the device went off, like a light.
Wow. So did the paranormal activity with around her, or allegedly around her, did that sort of start then after the tomb had been desecrated?
Well, what happened, the story goes, and it was a grand tomb built in, top of my head, I can't remember when, but a long time ago. And it was a very grand tomb with red glass. When the sun would shine, the marble tomb, the image of the Mary Ann Robertson would be bathed in red when the sun would shine, and hence the name the Red Lady.
Right.
So that was the tomb of the Red Lady.
Mm-hmm.
So in the late 70s, there was a group of, I think it was glue sniffers, smashed the tomb, wrecked it. It was gradually getting vandalised as time went on, but they actually went in and robbed the coffin. They took the head from the tomb. And I expect done prosecuted under some ancient grave robbing law. It happened in Greyfriars too. In the early 2000s, there was some guy done for nicking the head of the judge. It did go on. But after the one in Warriston in the 70s, there was maybe 5 examples of people seeing strange phenomena around the cemetery. There was also an incident in 1979. There was BBC Scotland were filming a show called The Omega Factor, it was on BBC. It was kind of like a 1970s version of the X-Files. And in one of the episodes, they were filming in Warriston Cemetery, and there was incidents with things turning up in the viewfinder that they couldn't explain. They're saying, that guy's in the shop, can you get him out? And they says, well, who? There's nobody there. It kept turning up. It was like a hooded figure. There was also incidents with a camera falling over into a grave, a tomb collapsing, and one of the BBC camera crew being injured with a gravestone, all in the vicinity of where the Mary Ann Robertson's tomb, the tomb of the Red Lady, was. So it's quite a place that's got quite a history of goings on. So,
are there any stories around the castle in Edinburgh?
That's funny you should say that, because yes, the next project, I'm taking a couple of months off. Every month for the last 2.5 years, I've done an episode on the YouTube channel, sometimes with 2 months, sometimes with a month, ensuring there's one at the end of the month. I'm going to take a few months off, and that's the place I'm going to start researching, is Edinburgh Castle. It has got some interesting ghosts. It's got the story of a boy who was a piper and was supposedly sent down a tunnel to find somebody and take his pipes with him, his bagpipes. And he'd play the bagpipes to know that he was safe and they could get him back. But this occasion, he never returned. And the story goes that you can hear his bagpipes still playing in the walls of the castle. There's many other stories as well, but I'm just in the formative stages of starting to discover them. That's going to be probably my next episode. I'm lucky enough to work with a chap who was an ex-Royal Scot. And back in the 70s, he was one of the people that would guard the castle. For many years, they'd have Royal Scot guards standing in little boxes at the front of the castle. And they were there all the time, and he stayed overnight. And he's bound to have some good, creepy stories, to help with the story about the castle. There's many, but I'm just at the very formative stages of discovering them.
Yeah, no, that's fine. You mentioned your YouTube channel, so how long have you been doing that for? What sort of stuff have you got on there? What have you got coming up apart from obviously the Edinburgh Castle research?
What we've been doing, I think that the first thing we did was about 2.5 years ago, and my friend J.E. Ross, he was helping me presenting, the early episodes. And we did an interview with a chap, a friend, an ex-work colleague, who was in the film The Wicker Man. You ever seen The Wicker Man?
Yeah, I have. Yeah, very scary.
Yeah, Kenny was a guy who used to work with us. He's retired now, and he was one of the boys dancing around the maple in that famous scene with.
Yeah.
I can't remember if it was Brett Eklund or who it was. So he was telling us his, memories of working on this iconic film and how he got there, meeting Christopher Lee, meeting Edward Woodward, and Salento. So that was the first thing we did, and he was a reclusive character. To get a hold of him since his retirement, and we thought this is quite good fun. We put this up. So let's do the stuff about the ghost stories too. So we covered sort of some local ones. There was the story of the cursed bone, which is a very famous story. In 1920, was it 1912? I can't remember. There was a man lived not far near Comley Bank in an area called Lermont Gardens called Lord Alexander Seton. And Alexander Seton and his wife Zela went on holiday to Egypt and visited the Temple of Elixir. And while they were there, when they returned to their hotel, his wife revealed that she'd taken a little memento from the tomb, you might say. She had a small piece of bone from a skeleton who was a serving woman and took it home with her in her bag, thought nothing of it. So when they returned to Edinburgh, to Lermont Gardens, they placed this little bone, like a biscuit, in a glass case proudly in their sitting room, and all hell broke loose. That was one of the first episodes we did. We filmed at the location, we spoke to neighbours, we spoke to some people that knew a fair bit about the case with the museum, and it was great fun. We afterwards covered things like the Mary Ann Robertson story from Warriston. We went on to do episodes about different areas of Edinburgh. There was one about the New Town, which is directly over the Dean Bridge. There was many stories, almost like a trail of stories that you could connect all good ghost stories with that. We did the one about Portobello, which is the Edinburgh seaside, and that had quite a history, as well as many frightening stories along the way. The one we did in the summer months was about South Queensferry, which is famously beneath the Forth Bridge. If you ever see the iconic Forth Rail Bridge, the big red bridge connects Fife and Queensferry, we discovered a lot of stories about there. And
could you give us an example, maybe?
Yeah, certainly. Well, the most iconic one was a bizarre pagan tradition they've done for hundreds and hundreds of years every August called the Bury Man. And the Bury Man is a character covered in thousands of burrs who walks through the city centre all day on the second Friday of August. Everywhere he goes, neighbours and local pubs will give him whiskey and money for safekeeping off the borough over the following year. So it's got a bit of sort of Wicker Man stuff going on there.
Yeah.
So we covered bits about the Bury Man. There was other stories. There was a terrific story about a monkey, the ghost of a monkey in Lone House. It was customary, a lot of people, especially by seaside towns and docks, would acquire pets from abroad, including monkeys. And there was this family had this monkey in a house, and they treated it very cruelly. The servant would kind of torment it. And the story goes that one night this monkey was freed by an ember from the fire, burnt its rope, and it made its way to the servant's room and ripped her throat out, and angrily haunts this property ever since. So that was a great one to research. I spoke to lots of people from the area that knew the story. There was many others. There was the Hawes Inn, which is a haunted pub. There's the story of the white lady who's seen that supposedly fell from the bridge on her wedding day. Lots of good stories from Queensferry. That was 2 months. That was a lot of fun.
So you're writing a second book then. So what's the story behind that then? And how's that going? And what sort of things are in it?
Well, it's been a very busy time. I mean, as I said, once a month I try to produce a 30 to 40 minute episode for the channel featuring a selection of stories with a theme. We did a good one recently about the cinemas. I was reading this little number earlier.
Oh, right, okay.
and I noticed there was a good story about a cinema in there.
Yes, there is actually. Yeah, for that, obviously, On the podcast, people won't realise that John just flashed my book, which I'm a bit embarrassed about. Flashed my book onto the screen. So, because this is supposed to be about you, John, not about my book. But yes,
well,
right. Cinemas are. Yeah, there's a story there about Accrington Cinema. But go on. Tell me about your research in cinemas then.
Yeah, so we did an episode and it was all about the theatres and cinemas of Edinburgh, and that was a lot of fun. But again, it takes a lot of time to do. I'll tell you a little bit about that one, as a matter of fact. It was titled as a Terror in the Back Row, that's what we called it. And there's many cinemas and theatres, some still around, some long gone in Edinburgh. And one of the famous ones is called the Playhouse Theatre, which is in the city centre. I'm fortunate enough to have a friend that's worked there for 30 years. And he gave me some good first-hand accounts. The one famous ghost of the theatre is known as Albert, and it's a stagehand who supposedly died there some time ago. And there's been so many stories of people encountering him, and you're being introduced to him, and dogs being scared of him. They had to get specific dogs from the castle that were used to being amongst spirits to go in and check the theatre. So that was great fun. But there was other ones. There was cinemas, and there was a couple of stories of a local cinema long gone that's since become 3 supermarkets, and they've all had encounters of a similar man they reckon to be the usher, clicking his fingers to catch your attention. That was a lot of fun. There was a story of I spoke to a chap that had a frightening encounter in 1981 where a cinema soon closed down. It was kind of similar to the one in your book. It looked like that, before the multiplex.
Yeah.
And he had a terrifying encounter. And I've done a fair bit of research on that, and uncovered that the site where he had seen some commotion and heard some horrible noises, there'd actually been a murder in the very early 60s where it happened, and he didn't know about this. Possibly a connection. There was all kinds of gruesome stories surrounding this small, pleasant area of Edinburgh, but it was just a hell of a coincidence that happened exactly the spot where he'd had this terrifying encounter. And he's never walked down this alleyway from the cinema ever again since 1981. He made a point of that. So anyway, that was the theatres episode. After that, we're doing this every month. I do a ghost walk in the summer months, all kinds of other stuff. I'm going to take a few months off, and I'm going to focus on the second book.
Yeah.
And the second book is called Beyond North Edinburgh Nightmares. And it is not going to be fictional stories. It's going to be a collection of all the stories featured in the YouTube stories over the year. So it's going to be a greatest hits, if you like, of all the stories we've covered in the last year. So it should be a lot of fun getting it in print.
Yeah, I shall look forward to that. I'll have to check that out. I was going to ask you actually about your ghost walk that you mentioned, because that's something that I'm really interested in. Do you want to tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, certainly. And we started it in the summer months. Thing with any ghost walk, I've been on many over the years. The first one I ever went on, famous, was in the Isle of Wight. My in-laws live in the Isle of Wight. And we went on some of the walks there with the marvellous Mark Tuckey, who's been doing it for a long time. 1994 they've been doing them there. And Gabe Baldwin, who writes the books. And I thought, this is great. I'd love to do something like this one day. And we eventually made it work, under the guise of the name of, Captain Tantalon. I take on the form of the sort of, like my granddad, the sort of old seaman, and take a group of people around the area and tell them some creepy tales. It lasts about an hour and 40 to 2 hours, and culminates in the famous Wardy Steps story at the end, which is perfect when it's dark.
So where does it start from, that then?
Starts off at a place near a school, which is now playing fields used by rugby teams. Hibs Football Club train there, and other things. But way back down the line in the 1800s, it was the first, it was used as a naval training camp. And then it became the first example of temporary accommodation in Edinburgh. And it was known as Lochinvar Camp. And they had these huge, big Nissen huts. They looked like air raid shelters, 10 of these huge, ugly constructions with people staying in them, waiting to get houses after World War II. Eventually, they fell into disrepair, they moved people out, they started getting houses. And the first instance was a girl spotted a strange looking character following her, going a paper round one morning in the site of this camp. And after that, over the years between, well, what was that? It was the 40s to 2008, there has been sightings of the same character on many occasions. Traditional attire, sort of like old-fashioned clothes and a flat cap, like somebody at Peaky Blinders or something. And lots of people have seen this similar character. Nobody knows what he's wanting, what he's all about, but there's certainly been 5 to 6 examples of people seeing him. That's the first one. We go down to Boswell Road, which has got lots of grand properties on the road, so there's some good stories.
Yeah, sorry. So you were saying about the walk?
Yes, so there were a couple of stories of dogs, famous dogs from the area that haunt parts of it. One, a lady that came on the walk a few months ago, she worked in a hospice, which is in the vicinity, and she had an incredible story about a wee dog that haunts one of the wards, and the amount of people that have seen this terrier on their bed and says, "Can you get this off?" And it turns out, with a bit of digging, a bit of research, the 1962 Disney film Greyfriars Bobby, the dog that was the actor dog in the film lived there.
Right.
And they reckon it is the spirit of the wee dog that played Greyfriars Bobby.
Wow.
That haunts them.
Yeah.
So it was a cracking story. Really
yeah. That's quite a circular story, then, isn't it? Really, considering the dog was playing a famous dog that, there are. Am I right in saying that there are reports of actual Greyfriars Bobby, the ghost of the dog, being seen still around the grave where he used to sit around and wait for his master to come back?
I don't know a huge amount of that story. Greyfriars, I know more about the Covenanters and the George Mackenzie stories.
Right.
But there is talk of the dog as well. But this was the actor. When they demolished the hospice and rebuilt it,
right.
Under that room, they found a coffin with dog bones.
Wow!
And I believe they put it back. They replaced it when they rebuilt the hospice. But that's what I reckon it was.
So that would explain that then, wouldn't it? So how do people get in contact with you then when they're in Edinburgh and they want to go on one of your tours?
Yeah, it operates from spring to autumn. I mean, it's too dark to, it's no good at this time of year for doing ghost walks. It's just too dark. A lot of the things you see on the Walker visual, it involves the Forth estuary, it involves Fife, the islands in the Forth, it involves the properties we tell the stories of. So it's just, you've got to get that nice mix where it's kind of getting dark and it culminates in darkness for the last story. So I think April to September, end of August is the time that I'll be doing them next year. And it's just drop me an email on the website on North Edinburgh Nightmares, or get in touch on Twitter or Instagram, and we'll work something out. I just book them to order, really.
Yeah. What's the name of your YouTube channel then?
It's just North Edinburgh Nightmares, and it's got several videos on there to take a look at. Some fictional stories, some kind of historic accounts, a bit of everything, and the interview with Kenny from the Wicker Man. So something for everybody.
Do you do any investigations into a sort of wider area then? I mean, obviously you concentrate, very much on your local area and the local city. Do you do any investigations further afield?
In regards to investigations, I mean, the only sort of things with proper paranormal equipment and stuff I do with Spirit Vision from Cheshire. That's the only sort of other things I've done. But with regards to finding the ghost stories from other places, yes. I will actively travel to the places and try and find the stories that are documented. My
what's your favourite? What's your favourite one then? Sorry.
My partner lives in Hampshire, so I spend half the month down in Hampshire and half the month up here when I work. So when I'm down there, I'm running around all the parts down there: Guildford, Farnham, Isle of Wight, Alton. All these places have got incredible stories. I went to Alton's an interesting one. It's got a few really good ghost stories, and it's one of these places where you hear where there's a tragedy or there's a really bad story, and it's almost like the place never really recovers. Now, Alton was the home of Sweet Fanny Adams, the famous story of the little girl Fanny Adams, who was butchered on the plains by a madman. Just this horrible, horrible story. And it so coincided that at the time when they were changing the rations of the British Army, that they got this horrible new food in a tin, and they said that resembles the remains of Sweet Fanny Adams, or not that. And that's where the term Sweet FA came from.
Right.
This child.
Yeah.
So her ghost supposedly haunts the area. And I went there and spent the day around several other stories of a dog holed up in a wall and other things. And it just had a feeling of dread.
Yeah.
The whole day. But it was quite interesting. I've done many other ones, around Guildford. It's got many good stories. Again, Farnham, other parts have all got good tales of their own. And of course, Farnham was the home of the famous Peter Underwood, the famous ghost hunter, and wrote many books around the British Isles. Yeah. So you've got walking in the footsteps of a legend when you visit there.
Fantastic, great stuff. So yeah, just remind me again then of your website.
It's just a Google search for North Edinburgh Nightmares. Is the title. It's I think www.northedinburghnightmares.wordpress.com is for the site. That is the one. It's a WordPress site.
So we can get in contact with you through that if we need to, or on Twitter and Facebook, the usual places.
All there, and get in touch with me, from that. But yeah, it's just a Google search for North Edinburgh Nightmares, and it'll come up with
good stuff. Well, it's been really good to talk to you, John. Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure. There's some really good stories there, really interesting stories. And the next time I'm up in Edinburgh, I will definitely, I'll definitely try and seek you out. I'm partial to a nice single malt, so I do like to get up to Scotland every now and then. And I hate to say the G word, but I've been to Glasgow probably more than I've been to Edinburgh. But I'm quite keen on there's a whiskey pub near the train station in Glasgow called the Pot Still, and that's I actually spent my 50th birthday in there and got very, very drunk and had a fantastic time. People up there are just so friendly and so welcoming. So yeah, it's been great. Thanks very much, John. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. And
I'm away on Wednesday down in England, and I'm going to be reading this when I'm away. I'm looking forward to it, believe me.
Well, I hope you enjoy it, and I'm going to seek out your book, and I'm going to give you your book. And good luck with the new one as well.
Brilliant.
Yeah, you'll have to let me know when that's available, and when that's done, we'll have another chat, and you can tell us all about your new book.
Excellent, brilliant, many thanks.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you. Thank you to John for some really interesting stories. Remember to check out his YouTube channel, which is North Edinburgh Nightmares. It's a really well done, really professional channel, and there's some great stories on there. Remember to check out my website, which is www.craigbryant.co.uk. Thank you for listening. Paranormal Pendle Podcast will return, and remember to keep watching the shadows.